There is a man who lives in the north. He lives in Laos. An American pilot found out where he was and told Lair.
The
largest helicopter anybody had ever seen, 50 feet long. And so they met. Lair was very tactful. He asked a question, "What are you going to do?" And Vang Pao launched in a soliloquy. Vang Pao not only wanted to protect his own country, not only wanted to help his people, but he was ambitious himself. It was extremely important for Lair, who was a very subtle operative, to find out what the other side had wanted. He wanted it to come from Vang Pao. He would have the Hmong as the tactical field commander, the guy who would call the shots in the field. The supporters would be the Thais and the Americans. And he and Lair remembered it almost exactly the same word for word 50 years later. These are our hills. These are our mountains. However, the enemy has come. If you give us arms, we will fight them. If not, we will flee.
Northern Laos has been home to the Hmong for 2 centuries by this time. And all of them believe that that's their homeland, that's their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, their ancestors had lived there, harvested that land, died there, buried there, and they felt that's their home and they needed to retake. By this time, the CIA's very interest is to deter communist aggression in Southeast Asia. Bill Lair was sent to Southeast Asia specifically to fight guerrilla warfare by the CIA. And he went in and he got the trust from the Thai, and he incorporated the Paru program, training these men into special forces.
It was Lair's original plan not to have any white Americans at all. He wanted the Paru to work with VP. They just blended right in. Nobody could tell that they were there. They became the instructors and the advisors.
Desmond Fitzgerald sent an 18-page cable back to Washington to the CIA headquarters. And shortly after that, it got approved to arm 1,000 men. And that's how Operation Momentum came about.
The Americans had all these surplus arms. They were surplus from World War II. They were already in crates. Pathet Lao communists saw those first supply parachutes dropping and came in.
And they conducted a 3-day training program for the Hmong to harass and intercept Congolese troops and the communist troops.
The Hmong were set up for ambushes. The Paru were there, but the Paru were not holding weapons themselves. They were advising. They wanted the Hmong to do the shooting from the very start. They wanted Vang Pao completely in charge from the very start. The ambush went off without a hitch. They killed all the enemy soldiers. There was a lot of rejoicing. There were Hmong who jumped for joy. There were Hmong who were not involved in the fighting who pleaded for a rifle. And Lair arrived in a small plane in the midst of all this rejoicing. And that's how the secret army started. Vang Pao asserted that he could raise a guerrilla force of 10,000 tribesmen. The CIA said, okay, start small. The Hmong already had 12 resistance centers set up around the Plain of Jars. This came from previous stages of war they'd had with the French, so the Hmong were really, really prepared. So it went from the first 1,000 in about a month, and then 4,000, 6,000, up till 10,000, and then quickly mushroomed past that. Vang Pao was ambitious. He was a man of great ability. He did not want to be a guerrilla commander. He wanted airplanes, he wanted artillery, he wanted tanks, he wanted to fight a conventional war. Once Vang Pao got a hold of conventional weapons and air power, he would want to fight the Vietnamese head-on, the most capable army in all of Asia at that time. The Hmong in Laos at that point had only 250,000, and the North Vietnamese had 19 million. So Lair always wanted it to be a guerrilla war, and Vang Pao always wanted to go big. The more the Americans spent, the less successful the war effort was. A decision was made to place a radar apparatus on a mountaintop called Pupati that could be used for helping American warplanes navigate even through cloudy, rainy weather to Hanoi to drop the bombs that were supposed to win the war.
North Vietnam feels the threat, feels the pain, and they send in a large number of troops into Laos to take this site out. At the same time, south of Pupati was Naka, Site 36. The United States utilized Site 36 as a rescue base to rescue down American pilots. The Hmong played a significant role in that.
It was very obvious from the reconnaissance planes that the North Vietnamese were determined to reach this mountain and to capture the mountain peak, rather than serve as a strategic advantage to the U.S. side to have that facility on the mountain top. It turned inside out. It turned into a target. At the beginning of the war, it was very simple. The Hmong were protecting their own lands. To protect somebody else's land involves a layer of an abstraction that many were not quite ready for. The war was like a kaleidoscope where the tubes were twisted and the picture changed completely. People in Washington started thinking that instead of the Hmong having an operation to defend their own territory, they really should help out the operation in South Vietnam.
To different people, the war was about different things.
It would endanger the security of all and the peace of all of Southeast Asia.
To the proponents of the war, it was about stopping the march of communism across Southeast Asia. There was something called the domino theory.
All we want in Laos is peace, a truly neutral government, not a Cold War pawn.
The opponents of the war saw it as the U.S. meddling in what was essentially a civil war in that region.
There are no American combat forces in Laos.
There were stories about the secret war in Laos, but not a lot of coverage. The main show was in Vietnam.
There was a lot of fighting, there was a lot of running, there was a lot of shooting, and there was a lot of dying. And I never learned the name of more than one or two airplane pilots because they had quite a high mortality rate. We had two groups that we flew in, primarily Air America, and the other was known as Continental Airlines, and they worked for the boys next door. We delivered rice for the 2 years that I worked with POP, helping people go to a new area and get started in a new life. There was quite a lot of attrition among the Hmong soldiers. It got so bad that at one time General Vang Pao had to send out the order that all students, male up to the age of 11, were exempt from going in the Army. But if you were 11 years old, you were drafted and you ended up in the Hmong Army. I went out to the airstrip one day and saw a group of soldiers around a body. It was a very small body. Talked to a little boy next to it. He was 12 years old, and he was dressed in a uniform that was about 3 times too big. He was Hmong, but he knew Lao. And he said, "That is my friend, Li Cao. He and I both joined the Army a year ago when he was 10 and I was 11. And he was killed this week, and I am flying back with his body to the village that he came with." His rifle accompanied him, a small carbine suitable for that of a boy. The larger rifles went to taller, more grown-up men. But a helicopter or a plane picked up the body and they picked up the gun, flew them back to the village. He was buried and his carbine was then handed to the next boy that took his place in the Hmong army.
At school next to the airport, one of my friends, her name's Julie, so we would just grab into the airplane, away from the family to a nurse training. Why am I doing this and no other? Why other girls, they can be with a parent but not me? Until you see all the wounded soldier, until you see all the sick patient, until you see all these patients who are critical in an ICU, you will be taught that you have to help your people. And you should not be scared. And you will be with other nurses too. And they will be there for you. It doesn't matter how old or how young you are. They will treat all the nurses at the same level. And they will make sure that you treat just like everyone else over there.
Thầu wartime đó mà tôi plan nâng mà thầu lu giờ cho tôi mới cho bông bị bông cho tôi nào không mỏi chị yêu cho housekeeping cho tôi này cho chính này nữa nè bông chân trai bông chỉ có đó ta chỉ cũng mà bông chân trai giờ cũng yêu chủ một xe những chơi mùa giờ cũng yêu chủ ta có sao chờ bé mà thấy khé có ta kia bé mà mới nhớ hồng sa có một đứa có lúc family có sao phụ có lúc family nữa hay dùng đó nữa because bố to rồi ta chỉ bố tụ pli nè bố tụ pli bao ở chị hiểu chủ ta cũng tụi mình chỉ giống lại có sao chơi nữa mà nó chỉ có thâu có một chế sữa có sao chơi nữa nè cũng mua luôn nè I don't know the tear come out nè chị cũng muốn soi của ta sắp cô cái giờ mình chỉ có một bụng nhiều sẽ sai nữa nè.
It was determined that Long Cheng would be the ideal place for the Covert War so that it's easy to protect and defend and that it's remote so nobody would know where it is. When that radio station was set up in Thailand, they could broadcast and Vang Pao also distributed radios to the village chiefs from different regions so that they can listen to the broadcast. So that's a way how Vang Pao could get his influence in and educate the remote communities about communism versus democracy. That's how he was able to get more and more of the minority groups to join him. Where there's no discrimination, he encouraged pageant contests with a very diverse pageant contests from different ethnic minority groups.
It wasn't just about fighting, it was about helping the Hmong progress. And that is part of the reason that Vang Pao was able to get so much support from the Hmong. So this wholesale transformation started as a result of the war.
The war itself opened up the opportunities for the Hmong. Those that are able to go and study will go. Where a human was raised and all he knows is working on the field and became a legendary pilot. Where a young man was raised in the mountain and were able to guide U.S. bombers, the Air Force, to go in and bomb enemy targets. If the Hmong was giving the opportunity, the Hmong can learn to be anything. So while he was fighting the war, all of those soldiers that have at least some kind of education that can read and write, Vang Pao assigned those to be teachers. That's how much a man sacrificed and strategized to move his people at the same time defend his people.
Over the objections of many who did not think the Hmong had the ability to fly combat planes, the U.S. Air Force set up a program called Water Pump to teach South Vietnamese and Laotian pilots to fly.
Cho mua lì lử bây giờ lâu tờ nó mà nhà ta hàn lâu họ á mù chị nên tuy là linh đơn này thế phải nói thế lử ya cái kỳ thế kinh chỉ là kinh tụ từ bỏ lên nhà tàu nhau sau tụ bỏ tàu lúm bom là chỉ của thì kinh ta là của chỉ vừa xanhแต่สิหรือมันเหี้ยตัวทหารเราหนึ่งป้อแต่ลูกคือหานาตัวเดนาคันนาลูกหย่อมไม่หย่อปอต่อนี่นาเจนยาเต้าเนี่ยทหารเราเขาอานะเน้นตัวอย่างปิดโจตช่องปลดโจช่องย้อนย่องแต่หนึ่งวันมาทอดตัวโจลุ่มบ่มcapacity เด้อลูกท้องแท่งจ้ามาจะต่อเป้สมองน่ะเป้สมองหนึ่งงงยาลินเด้อมาหมดที่ตัวมาอยากจุซัวเกินก็อยากอ้อลูเอชิปะชอบหมูอีลูอีโจแต่สิไปจะมองมาเนี่ยว่าอยู่เนี่ยเสียใจม้วนเลยเท่เจอย่าเนี่ยคือเนี่ยตีเนี่ยเขาตื่นอย่าหลานมูต่อหมูอีเรากูมาให้มั่วให้จองกูอย่ามองไอ้กูจะรายงานซะรัวให้เตะกับกูรายงานไอ้ยังมาชอต่อตาที่สิจะปิดรัวเลยเนาะกูอีปวดปุษยทหารกูลูกกูรู้เตะเจกูลูกกูเป็นสังว่ากูปล่อยเนี่ยลาจงเลยกูมาซูเปอร์เรียลส่งตู้กูจะจุดตัวซะสุดอดจะเนี่ยฮะรู้ได้ด่าจะมันเตะกูจะมาจีเรากูลินเดอร์เทียจะในรัวๆตาเนี่ยแต่แย่ก็ยังทหารอีปวดปุษยเตียกูเป้าก็ว่าต่อเลยจังตัวโกตัวรงลีก็เก่งลีก็ตู้จิตตัวเตียนะไม่จะต่อไปจิตตัวกตาเจ้ากูเตะโอ้ยยาลิเจโตว่าจบลงเชียกูตู้เชียนท่าจะคุณจะเจียละให้ตัวกันหาจะจังหันนะอัตเชเลยตู้ใช้ชัวกงทัพอากาศเลยเนี่ยเขาสถานทูตเลยกูเตะเตาละเตอรี่เตาละ now I know กูเป้าเขาตื่นมาจำไม่เนี่ยเนี่ยเจียงงงสุดน่ะเทียลาลัวสุดน่ะมันนี่เทียม business ไอ้ยานะตู้เชียเจียละให้เราลุ้นได้ทุกกูตัวโกตัวตรงนี้ก็ตัวจิตเอาตัวนะไปจิบปูก็วันนี้ไปสาก็มากังเก่งแล้วก็มูอินหูอีโรกังหัวก็มูอินหูอาโรมูเรนเตสุอยู่เลยจะทำหมดตัวเนี่ยจออยู่ลุ้นตัว
because they did not see that the war could be won there. In this way, they came up against opposition from Vang Pao and others who wanted to win the war, who wanted heavy weapons, who wanted everything that they could get.
可是本到路电车上到木有了早节的，叫我们干的进来的木最寂寞了，照年我寂寞了。也头路见的也头我呢也叫人到还中间，人家比这个到这个的多，也对那也不能听公司。
The Hmong were primarily trained in guerrilla warfare. Now they want the Hmong to fight a conventional warfare against the well-trained North Vietnamese army. You had about 20,000 men of the special guerrilla units in combined with military region 2, fighting against about 70 to 80,000 hardcore North Vietnamese army, not the Viet Cong, they're the Viet Minh. Bellaire proposed to Washington that there might be an issue because men is usually the one that protect and feed the family. And that's why the CIA decided to fund monetarily to pay the troops. Vang Pao never asked for money. He only asked for weapon. So as money became a factor, it also helped grow the special guerrilla units. Because now men can go in and fight and get paid, get pretty much a job, versus someone with no job and work out on the farm.
They bombed very heavily without having the desired effect. It was militarily unsuccessful. You could not stop the Ho Chi Minh Trail through bombs. It was like having the wrong tool for a job. It's like if you want to make a clean cut through a piece of wood, you would use a saw instead of a sledgehammer. It was simply the wrong tool. Nevertheless, it was a tool that the Air Force was very willing to use and the Navy to expand its mission. Since the North Vietnamese were violating the Geneva Accords, the Americans could too. So long as everybody kept quiet, everybody would violate the Geneva Accords.
At the 1962 Geneva Accord, it guarantees Laos neutrality for all foreign troops to withdraw from Laos. By this time, North Vietnam has about 40,000 troops in Laos. So the United States withdrew the CIA and the troops out. There were really no uniformed troops. They're just advisors to the Lao army. The Vietnamese, on the other hand, didn't withdraw any other troops. they just put on civilian clothes because, like the Peru, that they could blend right in, the Northern Vietnamese could also just blend right in. So for the Westerners, they couldn't tell, but for those in Laos, particularly for Vang Pao and the Hmong, they knew who the Vietnamese are because they've been fighting the Vietnamese since the 1950s.
There was no question that North Vietnam could have sent in large numbers of its own forces and taken over Vientiane if they had wanted it enough. However, this was to cause them to hesitate and to make them aware that they would have to fight through the Hmong to do so.
Mong chỉ số bỏ tua cho nhà là mong sâu lúc tiền đầu sẽ gì cho nhà là xa cái này nhà là chân chủ đầu mong cho cái mà sâu lúc tiền cái sâu lúc mình chỉ bỏ chỉ có thứ kia họ cho nên từ ship họ chỉ cho nên chỉ như thế trâu tua tả
có nhỏ trâu chia tê chỉ thủ nửa vô trò nơi chỉ nhà là số tôi cho chỉ nhà là mỗi có của một trâu sát tỏ nhà là lần chỉ có chỉ lý do tông đó lời mù có nhớ trâu sát tỏ này phong lời tỏ nó chỉ là số tôi cho chỉ cho vô tôi chỉ có tàu kia lo tỏ nó chỉ lý ý là một nhớ ý xa lời
chỉ thằng đó long chân bê xa tiền chỉ cho nhớ đây chỉ lời chỉ tổ bê là chỉ trong đời cũng cho can trọng nữa giờ phải đàn hồ hải giáo tông chùa hồ tự tôi chỉ này hoa bỏ chỉ này hoa bỏ thì u li no tiền này hoa bỏ tôiนึกchỉ rong giờ nâng đa giờ rồi tê tu tê kỳ bận tu chơi cho một trò này nó của tàu kêu ốp lằng gì tàu tê bỏ tê sấy nè chỉ nếu nó chỉ này hoa bỏ cô thì tàu mà ở bên nó chỉ này cô tê này tê thì nó đã lâu có nhóm đã có chỉ bọn tu có nhóm họ chùa xe có đàn chạy thông rồi có chỉ là chỉ mua rau mà món nói có tua to là chỉ bên nó bên chơi có tua nó bên nó bên chơi có tua bỏ nó mua rau mà món nọ thế có tua bỏ nó bỏ liền có nhóm họ có chỉ đàn trong cổ họ chùa xe chỉ bọn tu đàn chạy lại hay nó chỉ bên của nó bên chơi xe y xe o chỉ số lại là chỗ lô tổ thứ tua chỗ tôi tăng chỗ tỷ xong cả phụ chỉ can tu xe ao bên trong đó có một xí chỉ chỗ lô đó bung tê chỗ nào cũng là tới cha lúc trẻ các chỉ tàu ta là rồi tan trò chỉ tuần đầu lúc chỉ nó chỗ bên nó chỉ tàu lúc chỉ bên trong này sầu chỉ bên chỉ lịch hiểm chỗ bạc kế
này phong là mà là bao cầm là bao hạt thì giống một nuôi dụ nhìn mà thầu dụ nhìn mà luôn trong phần số vạ thì sinh hoạt này chùa bê lu họ phê mà bê một chân khó đó nhà là lu họ phê thì phải đa là mà là linh chân có tao luôn trong sinh hoạt được thế
cho nhau sát thì cho thả thì là giờ thả mông họ phê cho hồ là thả mông thì tua chỉ sợ đến chia cho sợ liên liên vào thì họ bông đồng tiền lấy là phu liếp lông thì là yêu phu liếp lông thì nó lên nào chỉ tua lên nè tua từ đó chỉ nè giờ cú tụi tiêu nhau thì là cú tua liền họ cú tụi cứ nhau thì là tua lên nè thì tua không đâu chỉ mà là tua chỉ hay ra tua thôi lử chỉ tao là lấy xe tụ qua chỉ lấy tàu hai lục tàu thọ thế nè như hai lục gì thọ thế à thọ đó sao tua nè bây giờ mông đi nè đi tua ni là tàu là cứ thế nè như hai nó nè chỉ si thằng đấy chống lại chỉ hành ra thì có một họ thọ kế này một chữ thọ kế tua kia cho áp cái tua thì tua kia lại là cho tất cả tua kia chỉ luôn kia là lợi lì là chỉ ôn hàng nho chỉ chia bay tua sư ở tàu tua dạng còn
The Lima sites originally were created so that they can supply. Because of the remoteness of northern Laos, people are scattered across the mountains. And when a village who are loyal to Vang Pao needed access, Vang Pao just told them to build the airfield so the plane can go in, and they just did. Some of them were strategic. Most of them were just based on if they are loyal and if they will fight, then they'll be supplied so that they can be supplied weapons and food and all of that. There has been argument about keeping those people there so that they could get rice. It's hard to say exactly what the strategy of the U.S. government at the time.
tụi nó nè tụi vi này cái hải nè vi này giờ tụi nó nè thái độ kia bên nhau bên long tranh cái số được cái số được bao làm việcทหาร有我的家的有叫ตัวนาย有我的家ตัว家cho nó cho nายทหารรอต้องเปล่าcho nóยอมรอเนอะจมวันไหนพ้นที่เลยยอมห้องย่อเนาะcho nó giờ này ta hẳn lo này phun đại pan ta
cho nó tí tuần phong sức giờ
lo sức thế
chuyện này phun là tua tụ nhu nhon đại ở chuyện cái nọ ở picnic park lock nó là mà nữa chuyện đó chuyện tua nhu chuyện phải nhu u nó chuyện chi thì giống mua thông tự chi chuyện tham bự làm cho pem lông peng chuyện chi chuyện chọn xài làm một ít bơ chuyện chọn xài mầm lông chọn xài cũng muôn thế chỉ cho cũng chia ở chặt thanh bờ sọ qua mua tập phở là sọ qua mua cũng mua này súp của ta bơ chỉ vào đi chả cũng bao giờ đi chả lên nên ta văng chủ là ta bạn mấy cần xếp phe anh nào đó cũng gì cũng chén gì cũng thế no này sẽ rong cờ này từ tuổi ba pe chỉ có chỉ bao nè cũng mặc hết có cũng tuần tiền hú nọ nè này từ chơi tuổi bắc lắc tuổi picnic tuổi nhu nọ nông phèn tí àกูย่อตีเป้ลูกเตยเชอวันเสาร์วันอาทิตย์เป้จมูต่อภาคมูลงเพ่งเทียมูนอมอต่อเขาได้ต่อตียาลิเน่จะจีเจนได้มามังโกรล่อรู้ก็เน่จีชอบต่อเนี่ยเน่ปุ๊บป้าเดี๋ยวถอดตีเป้ย่อจีต่อเป้เหลยมาเน่โจจีล่อนะอย่าเป็นรัฐบาลไว้เนาะก็ช่วยหายหมดเนาะนะอย่ากูมันบัวสปูเตโอไรเบอร์จีวริจาอย่าพงยืกูตัดชี้ก้าเลย
By the end of May, then Dr. Bontan came and he was waiting for all the nurses to show up. Then he would say, I'm leaving. I will cross the Mekong. And he was heavily emotional. He was hugging, putting hand on your head and say, I don't know I will see you anymore. But I will be in refugee camp and waiting for you.
Có những chỉ bao liền, bây nhau luôn không mở xăm thòng nó là nhà làng tôi nhau sầu trung nè, cú hay giờ mình cả chừng nho nè, vì ta ở bên thâu tôi này mò mồng xứ ở chừng nho nè, bố tôi chọn gang luôn mới lại xứ nè, everything is happened so quickly.
April 1975, Cambodia fell. 2 weeks later, big helicopter evacuation out of Saigon, and the U.S. pulled out, with Long Cheng being the central CIA base. The sky was falling now. Based on the peace accords that had been signed, both the Hmong and the Americans had hoped for a peaceful transition. But that was not the reality that was going to happen. Just as in Vietnam, there were the North Vietnamese troops that were surrounding the whole city. Coming closer and closer, within a couple of hours away from Long Cheng. Spies were coming into town, disrupting, watching. There were road watch teams that were put out on roads that had never had road watch teams because they were the friendly side, but there was no friendly side anymore. There was a large group of people, soldiers mostly, that gathered around his house for the last 2 days. He didn't dare leave. Đi lâu có mù giờ lo bỏ lo cụ tiệt này lo cho li rồi nên tiền tiệt giờ bé bao li mà bé những đồng chí nữa lo. So many of the soldiers said, Why is the general leaving and the high-ranking officers are leaving when we were the soldiers that fought in the war? People were angry that he didn't come out and say, this is what we will do, we will all go together, we will all stand together. There were people getting angry at each other, pointing guns at each other, saying, my family goes first, you stay here, you're nobody. I'm ranking officer, I go first. Anger, fear, and a lot of guns. So it was a very difficult situation. Jerry was the one who remained cool, calm, and collected, and it was his job to come up with a plan as to how to safely get the general out. If we count down the number of high-ranking officers and their families, how many do we think would be on that list? When the American planes came, chaos broke out at the airport. Now people knew this was an escape situation. It was no longer people following the lists. Now it was a free-for-all, and everybody was running for the planes.
và có mấy tráp họ tuôn phim 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 phong trô chỉ bù luôn nhau hồng ya yếu cả thâu và có chuyện nên.
Many people who were at Longcheng at the time say that it was their feeling that the general kind of drug his feet on leaving because the more planes that came in to take out his top officers, their families, a lot of other soldiers, it gave them more time to escape. You go in with a 130 to land, but nobody has ever taken off out of there fully loaded. They were actually clearing those mountains barely. Part of the escape plan that Jerry and the general had put together was that they needed some kind of a diversion, some kind of a cover.
And the plan was for the C-130 to land. As the C-130 boosts its engine to take off, both the Jet Ranger and the Porter were to take off. And for Ving Pao's bodyguards to get onto the Porter beforehand. The Porter took off, circled around, looking down, observing the evacuation. The Jet Ranger went down the ramp, came low around the King's house, and landed behind the King's house. Ving Pao took his Jeep and drove up to the King's house. They got onto the helicopter.
And so the C-130 was on the ground.
We've got a C-130 here on final. Landing lights just came on. This could be the last bird.
Everybody was focused on running to the back end of that C-130. Nobody else knew that once the general was gone, the air evacuation was going to end.
It took 1 hour and 20 minutes to make the trip. We're not sure that whether it's going to Woodbourne or Nampong.
By chance, one of the American C-46s, the radios had gone out, and so he didn't hear the message that the general was gone, abort, abort, the evacuation is over. So he went in.
Okay, the aircraft is filled now, but the people won't leave the rear of it.
Many of the people said that they could barely breathe because of the pressure of the people that were standing all around them.
Matt has revved up the engines and pulled ahead a little bit, and the blast has sort of discouraged some of them. They're starting to move away a little bit.
They also said it was so noisy, so chaotic with the engines and people talking, yelling to their family members that were still outside, trying to find their kids. But once that airplane took off, it was dead silence. He was the last plane, but he was so mobbed that the plane was only about half full when he took off and learned that that was it. The evacuation was over. 10,000 people standing on the runway, looking up at the sky, waiting for the next plane to come, and it never did.
Có sự trò lệ, có sự cho cái chân tôi trò tờ, có sao trò chuyện do cho một trò gì.
nè phun nó bỏ cho này cho tôi trò khía tôi trông là nữa yo chạy cú chỉ giờ ít tôi nọ cú chỉ khía chỉ tao có giờ mỗi giờ mỗi trò nhẹ cho bỏ chết tao cái có khía có tua sư có chỉ nhau ít tôi nọ giờ cú mà cú khía là cú chỉ ít tôi nọ mong này cú chỉ mà khía chỉ tao mong tua mong nhỏ ít bỏ chia sẽ luôn tụ bu bỏ cho xem rồi nhau sao luôn tự nhau luôn đó
lo hai tiêu lo tết cho tụ rồi chỉ một trò rồi giờ có nhau cái chỉ cái đó ở trò cái chủ ở trò cái giờ dùng cho lo một số tệ sư cái bậc cả.
Very quickly, the seminar system develops, which is basically a re-education camp. The government starts with the officers first, working down through the ranks. And those that are the higher officers are sent off to very, very remote areas, some Samnua, Vientiane, and put into basically prison camp.
We were born into being Jiaofa, trying to escape into Thailand. But I always thought that the Jiaofa was, the common theme for me was that they were resistant. They were for the Hmong nationalism, Hmong identity, Hmong sovereignty, and they were there to fight so that Hmong people could exist.
For the Hmong resistance that continued to build at Pubia, there were two main leaders. One was Sai Shua Yang, and the other was Zhongzhua He. But Sai Shua's group tended to work more closely with the former soldiers and the former officers that had removed themselves to the Pubia area. They counted on radios, they hid their guns, they tried to communicate with Thailand to find out, is there a plan? Is somebody coming to help us? Is there some way for us to get out of here? On the other hand, Zhongzhua was more interested in more like an independent Hmong state. His group relied more on supernatural forces to protect themselves. When the Pathet Lao heard that, they thought it was very humorous, sky god or god from the sky. And so they started using the term Jiaofa for everybody. The Pubia base is losing and people are making their way towards Thailand. The same thing is happening with Vang Kai Vu's group at Pumatau. They're all following these mountain tops.
Nên là dù bỏ dù cho nên tua thế chủ tôi dù cho nên tua thế xóa lụt cho thế dù cho em bự tàu bự bơ lụt cho cha tờ con đời tới sống còn cứ ý chỉ xa bỏ nên này do nó tùy hẳn lợi nó tùy hẳn dùng.
Soon as each refugee group moved to a province, within 2-3 months, you will see this whole side of mountain or hill fill up with grave. You know, with little kids, a lot of kids that die more than the adult.
Is there help? Is anybody going to come? Some of the messages said, hang on a little longer and we will send help. But hang on, hold that territory. Other messages said, nobody is coming, nothing is coming. The U.S. is gone, General Vang Pao is now in the United States. Get out of there, come. Jerry Daniels is one of the people who's saying, come out, come out. Even though he was absolutely clear that the U.S. government was not coming back, was not going to re-engage, he still was a protector of a certain kind for the Hmong that were in the refugee camps.
Jerry basically went native. He spoke the local language, he lived with them, and he's like a brother to them.
He just developed a very, very close relationship. They could trust him and he trusted them.
He has worked with the Lao operation for so long that it was really hard for him to let it go.
American Embassy, Bangkok, Thailand, May 14, 1982. Asphyxiation due to inhalation of carbon monoxide according to...
Ultimately, there was a casket that was sent back that was sealed, that the U.S. government said this casket is never to be opened. And so for the Hmong, there was never any closure.
You know how he started his letters off, don't you, Animal Man?
No.
Well, you just dribbling shit. Where the are you now?
bây chia giữa xã mồ chỉ cho bây tu nâng blo chỉ cho bây tu bây dần blo lúc xưa nó chỉ nhau bây ao to xã trồng chỉ chua là bây là tuột trồng là tuột trồng thì niệm nào lúc nâng này nó bây xã có sáu một cái gì là phần là giấy ra đá nên tụi bây giờ đời na
có trong đó đồ cũ thì có chỉ phụ cũ thì chỉ bung ở chẳng nó có vấn đề gì để tôi tao chỉ hay nên thế I am not position. I don't know how to do.
The Hmong probably had the closest relationship with the U.S. government of any other, or more so than any other ethnic group, whether in Vietnam, in Cambodia, or in Laos. The Hmong now, as a group, are in difficult situations because of this. They're the only group that the Vietnamese have pretty well singled out for anti-Hmong operations.
It became clear very early that the officials in Laos regarded the Hmong as threats, and there is evidence of severe sustained attacks, artillery and troops, reports of chemicals of some sort, poison chemicals being used against the Hmong. Those refugees that I've spoken with describe having lived in fear of their lives and living in the jungle for months and years and making an arduous trek which lasts weeks or more to get to the Mekong River and cross to Thailand.
The secret war, engaging people from Mien, Khai Mu, Lua, and Hmong hill tribes, was designed to tie down as many North Vietnamese troops as possible, keeping them from moving along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to South Vietnam. Hmong casualties ran to the tens of thousands, 10 times those faced proportionately by American soldiers in Vietnam. There is a startling absence of men and boys of fighting age among the surviving Hmong population.
Hở lỡ chọn bê thế hở lỡ tì tôn cha và bùa bê sở đời là tôi lúc tích chờ nó lỡ muốn lỡ tì bó cha tuổi cho tôi bê là hết chứ nữa.
Bê rong sẽ ủa, ta sẽ mà bê sai tiền giờ cho lùa lỡ hai tôi bê tại lỡ lúc bê lỡ hai thế. Ta sẽ thở chạy lỡ thì mỗi bê cho chị lấy đem lọc khoe, nó bê to là to chỉ tàu bê đá là đá chỉ tàu. From
the very beginning, it was this partnership. We'll give you weapons, you fight for your own land, your own independence, your own freedom. And it's been that way all along. It was, hardware, software. And Hmong got eaten up.
Bây giờ Hmong họ tổ chủ là tôi nhớ lúcที่มีการtổ chức cái bản mình tổ chức cái cỡ chơi gần trên đầu. Freedom is not free.
Our desire, even from the days of China, has always been justice and liberty and the right to exist in this world. And because of these two, motivation and desire, their force of energy that drew them together, and their friendship was not through some sort of doctrine or agreement, but it was in the battlefield. That's tremendous courage, tremendous sacrifice and loyalty, not to the American necessary, but to the cause of freedom, liberty, and justice.
Yes, the CIA created this, but the personality, the stubbornness of Hmong, their drive for independence, their drive for freedom, is part of what tripped them up. They didn't just roll over like the lowland Lao.
There are some families who've suffered so much, who lost so many relatives trying to cross the Mekong River that they will never recover from that grief. There are many other families who say to themselves, would I return to Laos now even though I miss the old traditional culture? No way at all.
Even now, everything's still very fresh in your eye, in your mind, in your heart, that you're not gonna forget it. The whole family are broken. Husband left wife, wife and children left husband, son and daughter left parent, parent left the kids. So we never connect.
nên chia bé tệ đua nó giờ chỉ giờ đua ở tàu tàu rong thế bé tệ tàu chỉ bé sa một chia ấy có trong một sa đèn đi nó lần từ là những sa có tệ tàu rong lo chỉ sa có bia.
I don't remember how she looked like, but what happened to my mind, her image always had me. I always think about her that what happened to her.
Tôi là tôi lần cháu học khơi tao là lần trai cho con trai của tôi. Con chơi với nhiều bữa cha, cũng muốn chạy thì chắc cái thế trong tụi mình nhiều rong ra đó cũng nên nó chỉ tiêu chỉ nên tiêu là bia chỉ nên qua theo. Nên nó chỉ chỉ bên một tuổi tan nhá là một tuổi tan thọ đủ. Mẹ nó chỉ bao nhiêu nó chỉ là một cờ lớn nhiều nó mì chỉ lớn nhiều nó mì lư chỉ là tới một tuổi tan trong đó lớn nhiều tí gì.
Chỉ bảo tụi này chỉ một nhau đây nữa này chỉ với tụi này cô chỉ bảo đây nữa qua đây cha là nữa là nhau là xưa na.
Chỉ mỗi trong nó chỉ nó, tới chỉ có một bữa này chỉ mỗi cái cháu nó có tài điện trai rồi bỏ cái sai chỉ, mỗi người để tiền bỏ nó có rau tí gì.
Back then is nothing. No psychology doctor, no psychiatric doctor, nobody evaluate people after the war.
Thế ở thế như vậy thì, của thế hay của bạn này thì chỉ cho mình chơi, cho nên mình nghe nhau rồi cho mình chơi.
Rồi mới cho nên chuyện chia nhau được nó nói cái thế sao một cái, rồi tờ tê là cho là tụi nhỏ là, tới khi mà chia lên nữa là chia, rồi là cho nên sao.
Tới khi vào trong này chỉ tin này. Họ tới bây giờ họ phải chỉ bảo ta đấy chỉ tôi một số tôi rồi bao nhiêu bây giờ tôi bây giờ tôi lá thế tôi giờ là mà thế nào mà cũng chỉ chấp lời mà sẽ chấp lời thì ở đâu cũng chỉ cũng ta sẽ đi là cũng bảo ta bây giờ họ phải là sẽ thế cho nhỉ nè.
Nhưng ở lần đầu chỉ ok chứ, cuối hai người thì có chỉ sắp qua cái sân chạy cái đó như thế này, có cho cái một chỗ cái cho tôi cái cho thà đó lọ. Thì có cho tôi cái tụi khăn mà bây giờ còn được có lúc con đó cho tụi mình nhon tới có xài thì có bác chỉ tao là của những hai rong trong nữa thế thì nếu trong một nửa hai thì thằng này cho tụi mình nhon là rồi nữa mà tới chỉ nếu có con nữa thế nào nữa hai đó.
I never saw her anymore after that, and I keep asking my dad what happened to her.
Của những nhớ cho nó nói chỉ muốn nó tự đầu tao khỏi thì cha của bỏ nhớ một đời của bác chỉ tao nữa bác chỉ tao của tụi khăn này. Giờ đi chạy ước tiêu chuyện nhỏ nó theo cô chẳng là tàu cái tụ cái bao nhiêu lo thầu ước xin cho là cho tại sao nói chỉ chia chỉ giờ ước cho mong rong lại để tiếp lại ước sẽ cho chỉ xong của để chia tiếp lại họ để chỉ để là cái chuyện bao để cao dần nhiều cái tôi chơi chi đó cái tôi đó anh nhà nát ta đó họ rong ta là cái chuyện là mò tôi chẳng chỉ cụ thế cái chuyện nó là cái chuyện quan trọng.
My mom has sent him the cassette that which recorded over and then sent it back to her. It was a very intimate communication between them, and in the audio cassette, my father explained his aspiration and his desire, his determination and motivation to go back into Laos to do the work of our father, General Vang Pao. And I didn't know about the audio cassette until I was in my 20s, and when I heard it, I remember crying. I just couldn't hold the tears back. And there was just so much emotion that was going through me, because for a long time, I thought that somehow I had something to do with my father leaving. I wasn't good enough for something like that. And had I known that he was going to Laos, go and join the Jaffa or the resistance, I would have done everything I could to stop him. But as a kid, I was about 10, 11, maybe a little bit older than that. I just couldn't stop him. I mean, I didn't know anything about it. And for a long time, I just carried that guilt that I wasn't good enough like other kids, other sons. That's why my father went and chose to join the resistance.
Tại vì cú ba vả lão anh này nhớ đồ luôn đi tên là mà nữ chỉ trong đi cao xã này con nhà nó cú cha kỹ lão anh này luôn đi tên là mà giả tụ chỉ nhiều chỉ tử chỉ xin đầu chỉ tàu nữa chỉ lại tên chỉ tàu nữa con nhà nó giờ tàu mà lại tên nữa
rồi sinh ra mà chỉ là cũng sẽ tháo cả các trong hai đó cũng cho mình nhiều ai cả lu ai cả mà nó lên nó là chỉ lu cái là gì là nó chính đấy ưa sinh chi ưa sinh lu ai cũng mà lu cả thầu từ ưa sinh chi là ya cũng chi cả cũng tôi mình chi cả chi này cho nên tu mà nữ giả li lu chỉ chơi và cho cá gì họ biết lu khâu khóa xin nó cái này nó hay là thì cả lần chỉ cũ ai cũng tạo cái mà project đỡ bao thì cũ là chơi xong là cái đỡ bao thì cũ chơi xong cả lần chỉ cũ mà cũ sao hay tiền chơi cái gì cái kia chơi điện nó cho lần cho tu la tu yêu lần chơi yon chỉ cái mình chơi yêu trong cái kia thì đợt này phun ba bỏ mình chơi nhiều lúc cái kia cũ sao chứ tại vì cũ xin chơi sẽ bắt đầu khăn nó ya cũng thiệt chỉ tàu khăn nó chỉ cũng đã các tua gió này cho nên tôi sẽ ưu chỉ tàu lò bỏ đi trả này ưu chẳng luôn này cái này.
Many times I've been told no one has ever asked me my story. No one's ever asked what happened to me. And so there's this sense of confirmation that they've actually shared their story with someone. A good number of times when I've been interviewing the dad, the soldier, the children will come to sit on the floor around, very quietly sit on the floor and listen to this, and you can see him transforming as he finally becomes a full person in their eyes. They tell me, oh, my dad never told me that story before, but he says I've told them many times, they've never listened.
Ai ta ta kia sa tơ san chi sa mo niệm một tia sa mo si mo nan mong chi lo cơ nữa có mua là bố của nó cũng mua là bố của nó em mong thấy một cái gì luôn giờ xin dừng xe này yêu cha giờ xin dừng xe cảm giác này nó mong cho có xin giải chỉ tao kia mẹ ta kỹ thuật của tôi mà ta tự ra tôi thì tôi nó chỉ hậu là nhưng tôi hậu sẽ cả khi lúc đi tàu mới tôi thì cái nhưng tàu liền
dùng đi cụ tê tròn xa nó giả tua là cụ dùng xía tua rồi thì rồi nó trở chua cụ tung bao xua rồi.
Production funding for the Hmong and the Secret War is provided by
Wells Fargo is proud to support this important documentary, The Hmong and the Secret War. As a first-generation Hmong American, I'm honored to represent a company that celebrates and embraces America's rich diversity. Watch out.
The Fresno County Superintendent of Schools is proud to be a longtime supporter of the quality educational programs found on Valley PBS. We continue to work together to honor and enhance understanding of the rich tapestry of cultures and communities found in our region.
Established in 1946, the Clovis Veterans Memorial District honors our Valley heroes, dedicated to the memory of all who proudly served, continue to serve, and protect the country. The district provides a permanent living memorial to the United States military and veterans.
Additional production funding provided by and by viewers like you. Thank you.